Group of 7 finance ministers meeting in Washington, D.C. say the global economy may be pulling out of the depths of a recession, although recovery was not yet assured. And they also pledged to ensure that big financial firms are sound. Feng Ling reports.
G7 finance ministers and central bank governors gave a guarded assessment for economic recovery later this year.
Financial conditions in some markets have shown modest improvement. And these are encouraging signs. But it is too early to say the risks have receded, and it's too early to conclude that we're beginning to emerge from this remarkably challenging set of pressures still working their way through the financial system and the global economy.
The G7 has been under growing pressure to speed up efforts to rid banks of bad assets that have plunged the global economy into its deepest crisis since World War II. The Washington meeting comes 3 weeks after an economic summit of world leaders in London. The finance ministers did not put forward any sweeping new proposals, but they stressed the need for individual countries to carry through on commitments. U.S. Treasury Secretary Timothy Geithner and his counterparts from the world's top 7 industrialized nations promised in a joint statement to provide what it takes to turn around their own troubled economies. This means the necessary fiscal tonic, tax cuts, or increased government spending. Individual countries must fulfill their pledges, and the financial officials must keep up the pressure on each other so that momentum is not lost. Besides the U.S., the G7 includes Japan, Germany, France, Britain, Italy, and Canada. Feng Ling, CCTV.
And for more on the weekend meetings, we go live to our correspondent Dong Wei in Washington, D.C. Hello, Dong Wei.
Hello, Dongnian.
Well, the G7 and G20 finance ministers meeting have just concluded, which lasted for 3 days. Then what are the key messages from this meeting?
Well, meeting in Washington Friday afternoon, the group of 7 finance ministers and central bank governors said they expect their economies to start growing again by the end of this year. That sounded a more optimistic note than the International Monetary Fund, which earlier this week forecast that any recovery will not take place until mid-2010. A statement from the G7 says recent data suggests that the pace of decline in our economies has slowed and some signs of stabilization are emerging. Economic activity should begin to recover later this year amid a continued weak outlook and downside risks persist. This message was echoed by U.S. Treasury Secretary Timothy Geithner later in the afternoon at a press conference. He said, without underestimating the challenges still ahead, there are signs that the pace of deterioration in economic activity and trade flows has eased. Some measures of spending in the U.S. and other economies may have begun to stabilize. Financial conditions in some markets have shown modest improvements, and there are signs that U.S. housing markets are beginning to stabilize. But he also warned it's too early to say that the risk has receded. Apart from offering an encouraging picture of the global economic prospect, the G7 ministers said they welcomed contributions from emerging economies and would work to expand the role of developing countries in the international financial institutions. They also renewed their pledge not to adopt protectionist policies and to swiftly implement the commitments made on the London summit. Back to you, Dongning.
Well, Dongwei, following the G7 and G20 meetings is the IMF and World Bank's annual meeting on Saturday and Sunday. And this is the second time in the month since the London G20 summit that high-level officials are gathering to tackle the financial crisis. Then what can we expect from the meetings?
The major task of the current spring meetings of the World Bank and the IMF is to follow up on the pledges made by the G20 leaders in London earlier this month. In the words of World Bank President Robert Zoellick, the meetings provide an important opportunity for all 185 members of the World Bank Group to assess the G20 outcomes and to make sure that their voices are heard. U.S. Treasury Secretary Timothy Geithner also said The first task ahead this weekend and in the weeks and months ahead is to implement the immediate London agenda of economic and financial repair, including the stabilization of financial systems and the necessary stimulus to domestic demand, and enhancing the capacity of the World Bank and other MDBs to respond to all members in crisis. Topics also expected to be discussed on the meetings are further reform of international financial institutions to represent more voices and to improve responsiveness and effectiveness, ways to strengthen monitoring of financial markets and to set up an early warning system, and more funding available to the world's poor countries hit hard by the economic recession. Back to you, Dongning.
All right, thank you very much, Dong Wei, reporting from Washington, D.C. And here are some comments on the global economy from finance officials of the Group of Seven. Were mixed comments on the global economy from the Group of